asked my friend Samantha, who's in from Turkey, in from the UK, in from Hong Kong. She's a global citizen. This is her third FTE. I've asked her to lead a discussion and a dialogue tonight. We entitled it Shalom, because God knows that we need some peace and harmony in this world. Samantha's background, she opened the Withers office in Hong Kong. So she had 17 years doing as a head of legal in one of the most important family offices in the world. She's got a breadth of experience in all of the kinds of issues that people are dealing with in this room. Would you please welcome Samantha?
Okay, so thank you, Julie. First of all, the title of this is Shalom, the Future of Rewiring for Peace. What I'm really here to do is to give you all a warm, fuzzy feeling before you go and have a drink. I'm definitely not here for doom and gloom. There is a lot of doom and gloom out there, but that's not the purpose of what I'm here to talk to you about. Now, I've sat in your seats for the last 30 years because I've worked with family officers all my career. And in various capacities as an external advisor, internal advisor, and eventually as head of legal, I've reorganized the shareholdings of two major public companies, which took many years. I've dealt with complex litigation, I've dealt with complex fraud, I've dealt with complex tax structuring, wealth planning. And then on the side, I did something which was for some particular clients. They engaged me in their view of the future. And their view of the future was a world where we have peace and we have harmony, we have sustainability, we have regeneration, we have care and compassion. And I did that alongside all my other stuff, including being like a Rottweiler, a brick wall, nobody can get through me, except these people who softened my heart to some degree. I guess I've always had a soft heart, but that wasn't something I really tried to take into my business. So I'm here to talk to you about peace at a time when, if you hopefully have been in a little bubble the last 2 days, you haven't been looking too much at the news, you haven't been worrying too much about what's going on in the courts in England, America, and The Hague, and trying to focus on your businesses. But I'm here to talk about why what is going on in the outside world is important to your businesses, the way in which we conduct our global citizenship, the way in which we conduct our dealings with our worldwide brothers and sisters does matter, because it's going to come and slam us all in the face if we don't. But as I've said, I want this to be a bit of a warm and fuzzy session because I want us to be positive about it. So Julie and I decided to do this talk right at the beginning, about 111 days or so ago, which many will know the significance of the 100-day period. I have given two presentations before at FTE. The first one was very much along the lines of, somebody coming out of a family office, dealing with climate change issues, economic change issues, the things that we needed to think about as futurists. The second time was in Mykonos, and it was just a few days before the events that happened in Israel. And by pure coincidence, I happened to be talking about peace, I happened to be talking about altruism, and I also happened to be talking about Hannah Arendt and the concept of the banality of evil and how that could be learned from in Jerusalem. I had no idea that a few days later we were going to have that tested. Julie has given a few cues to this talk throughout. First of all, she gave you a survey. She also mentioned something that she and I have been working on, which is the Iscariot Foundation, which is very much looking at the issue of peace through the lens of justice for all and dealing with financial and economic crime. So this was a question I know that was asked, and I know that the response was very positive, which is good because it's consistent with the warm and fuzzy feeling we want to leave here, which is that there is a purpose to what we're all doing and why peace is important, because we believe that humanity is a positive thing and there's great things that we can do. But that's not what everybody thinks. So this, every January, we have the doomsday clock that comes out from the atomic scientists. It hasn't moved since 2023. It's still 90 seconds to midnight, which is the closest to midnight it's ever been. What I would say is that I'm not sure how they're going to get from 90 to midnight, because the closer you get, how do you come back from it? So I'm not surprised that they've remained static, but they have in their January announcement indicated that obviously the recent events in the Middle East are something that are a serious concern, along of course with climate change and other issues such as what's going on in Ukraine. Now this is a little bit worrying, or has been in the UK. So this is a statement by our Defence Secretary in January, which has caused a little bit of consternation. So he issued, as they do with these tweets, a video in which he, and there was a statement in which the West seems to want to prepare the general population for war. And he said, back in the days of the Cold War, there remained a sense that we were dealing with rational actors, but these new powers are far more unstable and irrational. Can we really assume the strategy of mutually assured destruction that stopped wars in the past will stop them in the future? When applied to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard or North Korea, I'm afraid we cannot. Now, personally, I don't agree with him. Personally, I think that we have a lot of unstable actors throughout the world, and I wouldn't particularly apply them necessarily just to, or even to, all of the aspects of the Middle East, and we'll come to this. But the more important question, bearing in mind we have politicians who are talking in the background about war, about World War III, about discussions in the UK Parliament about whether or not there might be conscription, is the serious question for us in the room. Because why does it matter to us whether there's peace? Because it does matter. Because if we live in a bubble and we don't recognise that there are external events that are happening, then they can catch you all unawares. Because if we don't keep a weather eye to what's going on with our politicians and whether a number of them are war criminals, whether they're going to be prosecuted, whether there's going to be injunctions, whether there's going to be all sorts of issues over wars just starting almost overnight, as literally they have with in the Red Sea, without Senate approval. What does that mean for all of us? Because this can wreak absolute havoc with your supply chains, absolute havoc with your financing, with your customers, with your businesses. And as a lawyer, I can tell you, go and have a look at some of your key documents. Look at your force majeure clauses. Look at the clauses you had to pull out when COVID came. What happens when there are wars and acts of God? These things all have an impact. Suddenly money dries up, people start rushing into gold, all sorts of problems can happen. And indeed, in some countries, obviously there's been a lot of focus on whether there might even be civil war. And this is, you've also seen a lot of civil strife in Europe, as well as concerns over rises in fascism. So what does peace look like to you? I always like this picture because it's Kiev, which is a very tranquil place, and I particularly like that image. So we have two types of peace, really, that I want to talk to you about. And this is what we're seeing going on right now with all of the negotiations. So there's a model of peace which is built on coercive control. And there's another model of peace which is based on respect, collaboration, and trust. And I'd like you just to think about your own personal relationships for a minute. Because the way we live in our personal relationships are manifestations of what we do globally on bigger levels in our communities, in our businesses, and on a world stage. Some of us like to live by the motto of respect, collaboration, and trust, which means we want harmony in our relationships, equal balance. We have equally participative relationships with our spouses, with our children. We try to allow people to have self-determination. We allow them to grow as individuals. Other people don't operate like that at all. Some people operate on the basis that they are patriarchal, that they are controlling. People will do what they say. People in their businesses will do what they say. People in their countries will do what they say. And this is what happens. And so there's this concept of what's called Pax Romana, which is effectively the way that the Romans did it very successfully. It's a sort of imperialistic type strategy, which is that you have hegemonic power and you exert it independently over neighbouring countries. I don't know how to get rid of that message. Anyway, because it's not on here. Thank you very much. Yes, so that should be neighbouring countries, though it could equally say... Thank you very much. Yes, so that should be neighbouring countries, though it could equally say neighbouring companies. Because let's face it, one of the things I talked about in Mykonos is that, in business dealings, power imbalances can cause havoc in commercial relationships. So each of you, in terms of your own businesses, I'm sure have operations with many business partners. You may have to collaborate in private-public arrangements with the government. I mean, the comment about the SEC, for example. You always want to be in a position of mutual respect and respect for the rule of law in whoever you're dealing with, whether it be government or other companies or other individuals or powerful individuals. But some people obviously don't do that. They abuse power. So just some fuzzy feelings. So what does, and this is actually an interesting quote, because I'm starting with, what does peace mean to us? So for me, this is what peace means. Martin Luther King, if we are to have peace on earth, our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, our nation, and this means we must develop a world perspective. That's not the view everybody has. And one of the tragedies of where we are at the moment is that we seem to have genuine concerns at the moment about whether or not we are aligned with our tribes or whether we're aligned with global citizenship. And this seems to me to be a theme that's going to come through some of my slides as being one of the fundamental problems of where we are at the moment. The closest I could come to that statement, and forgive me, I do come from Hong Kong. I'm not there at the moment because there are a lot of fascists there. But I am going to say, and I don't think President Xi is a fascist, he's the closest I could come to for a statement like Martin Luther King, which is, we sincerely call upon all countries to hold dear humanity's shared values of peace, development, fairness, justice, democracy, and freedom, to promote mutual understanding and forge closer bonds with other peoples, and to respect the diversity of civilizations. Now, I follow him quite closely. He consistently says this. He's consistently the peaceful person in the room, I can tell you. If you follow this closely, there are a lot of warmongers in the West and in the East, but he's not one of them.
But how does he treat the Muslims?
Well, that's a conversation. So my fiancé is from Turkey. Yep. So I have conversations about this. And yes, they have a slight problem there, as they do in other places. And the way in which they are treating them, I would say, is not comparable to the way in which the Palestinians are being treated. So what are the obstacles to peace? And I think this probably actually highlights just some of a really important issue, which is fake news. So I was going to include a quote from Yuval Harari, who I have great respect for, but I didn't, because he talks about us being in a post-truth society, but when he talks about us being in a post-truth society, he also talks to us about the fact that we live in a regime of stories. That's what influences us, and he credits religion as largely a part of that. And I don't want to get into that today, because obviously we're seeing some ideological wars that are going on right now that may or may not be about ideology and may more be about economic crime. But the important issue about peace, and for me as a lawyer, coming to issues from a judicial perspective rather than from the perspective of a plaintiff or defendant, is that I spend a lot of time reading these days and correcting disinformation on the web. So my LinkedIn is very much about correcting disinformation and trying to deal with the issue of fake news. And propaganda is something that has been around, obviously, for a lot longer than I've been alive. But I remember as a child reading a very influential story by, I think it was Frederick Pohl, Tunnel Under the World, about the way in which advertising was used on humans. And so I've always, from a child, been very sort of aware of this, but the amount of disinformation that goes around is enormous. And we've seen it definitely around the events that followed Mykonos in terms of the events in Gaza. It's been horrendous, and it's been used to justify what may be is under consideration as to whether it might be genocide. So this one can't really be overestimated enough. Kindness, fascism, it's definitely around. Racism, absolutely racism. So this is a serious problem. No justice, no peace. So that sort of brings me to, I think, one of the questions that was asked on the survey is, do we believe a lasting peace will be achieved? And I believe the answer was no, in terms of the room. And obviously today we've had what's a historic judgment by the International Court of Justice in The Hague around the issue of preventative measures in Palestine, in Gaza. So for anyone who hasn't had the chance to see that, they have not ordered a ceasefire, but what they have done is restate the legal obligations of Israel and indicated that they want to report in a month's time as to the measures that Israel has taken, as to whether or not they are complying with their legal obligations as to humanitarian relief and avoiding genocidal acts. It's quite significant because what they have done is indicated that they believe that South Africa has the jurisdiction in this case to seek an order as to whether there has been genocide or not, which is something that Israel was trying to avoid by arguing there should have been diplomatic discussions, and there wasn't in fact a dispute. So that's quite an important threshold issue. As for the rest, they seem to, from my view, from my reading, and I've obviously only dipped into it because I've been at the conference today, they seem to be really holding the status quo, but putting an obligation on Israel to remind itself it has to deal with these issues. They have indicated that Israel should be following its obligation under the Genocide Convention to deal with and prosecute anyone who may have been inciting genocide, which is going to raise some quite interesting issues about whether there needs to be some regime change, because according to the allegations by South Africa, there have been substantive incitement to genocide by people in both the Knesset and also in the Netanyahu administration. So we have to wait and see what happens there. Obviously, we all know what the stated position is of the West, which is that Israelis and Palestinians equally deserve to live side by side in safety, dignity, and peace. And when this crisis is over, there has to be a vision of what comes next. And I think the general view is it has to be a two-state solution. Of course, the disagreements are how we get there and what should happen in the meantime, and whether it requires the complete eradication of the currently voted in politicians in Gaza. So how can we be agents for change? Sorry? Well, that was many years ago. And the point it's quite interesting because I have been following this, as you know. So the vast majority of the people who are alive in Gaza at the moment did not vote. Why? Because the vast majority of them are children who have had no vote or have been born subsequently. It's quite difficult, obviously, in the circumstances to get a handle on to what extent the Palestinian people support the current politicians that they have. Depending on where you read it, there may be substantial and growing approval of them. And even the Palestinian Authority indicated that, and they are effectively in place as a result of they are Israeli-backed, as it were, but they want it as a junior partner, the current Hamas politicians. And there has been a huge amount of disinformation around, including references back to mission statements from many years ago, which the current Hamas politicians actually have not endorsed. But this is terribly controversial. I don't want to get into the politics of it today, except to say that as reasonable, upstanding human beings, we need to recognise there's two sides to every story. The media don't always get it right, and there's massive amounts of disinformation around, which are and have been used to justify what are absolutely horrific events.
But one thing that is factual is that the financial backing of Hamas, the Houthis, and also up north, the Hezbollah, is from a nation that never has really confessed that Israel is a proper nation, and they want to eradicate them from the face of the earth.
Okay.
That is called genocide.
Okay. Well, first of all, Israel has not brought a charge of genocide against the Palestinians, which it was perfectly entitled to do if it believed that. And I would say that most of the world disagree with you on that point, by number and by country. But more significantly, you've indicated that without naming the country, that they're backing Hamas, we should remember,
I'm saying you're right.
but we should, well, except that we should all remember that Netanyahu has admitted, and it was referenced in the EU Parliament not so long ago, that Netanyahu said that Israel was backing Hamas when they first started, and that there were many statements that were made by Netanyahu and others to the effect that anyone who wanted to see Palestine effectively wiped off the face of the planet ought to be backing Hamas financially, which is, of course, what happened, I believe, with the Democrats saying that anyone who wanted the Republicans not to get in should be voting and funding the extreme Republicans, so the extreme Republicans would cause embarrassment to their party. So it's an exact parallel.
The question that you asked in the previous slide is a good one.
How can we be agents for change? Which is...
And that's what we want, is what can we do?
Exactly.
Right?
But I think this is an interesting discussion, because how can we be agents for change? Well, the first thing is going back to my slide, which is this one. There's two sides to every argument, which we've just demonstrated. You're not wrong and I'm not wrong. It may well be that Hamas is currently being backed by Iran. But it is true that Hamas exists because of Israel. They funded it, they encouraged it, and the current Hamas is not the same as the old Hamas. Now, we're going to have differences of opinion, and you and I could sit and debate this constructively as reasonable human beings. And I have great admiration, I should say, because when I saw your charity and what you're doing, you're clearly a very decent human being and philanthropic. But we may come at it from different perspectives, and we may find if we spoke for 10 hours that we would come to, a closer understanding. But the most important thing is that we have these dialogues that and this I guess comes back to Noam Chomsky and others, we have to be optimistic. So this isn't about, laying flat, as they say in China, and like giving up. It's so easy to do that. It's about how do we make a better future? Well, how do we make a better future is by people coming together and communicating, making sure that, the perspectives that people have are based on rounded sets of facts, which is what judges are meant to do. The whole thing about an adversarial system like the ICJ is that the idea is you get the opposition on either side. They have to collate all the evidence, and then they're supposed to pop it in, and then reasonable human beings are meant to sit down in a room and look at it all and say, well, I'm looking at both sides of the argument, and I'm also coming at it from the perspective of a reasonable human being, recognizing that they may even be pushing it to the extremes and trying to work out what is the real issue, and then how do we resolve it for all of these people? Because clearly, there's tragedies on both sides. As Albert Einstein said, much the same thing. The world's a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but those who do nothing. Now, who look on and do nothing. And the point here is it's the reasonable human beings. Because I think we all would fairly say that there are some extremists who are not reasonable on either side of the equation, every point of the compass. And it falls to the people who are in the middle. I mean, the target we saw on the dove is actually quite apt, that target on that dove picture.
Yeah, that's
because,
a great quote, by the way.
Because the point here is the people in the middle who are reasonable. We have to deal with the extremities, because the extremities are the people who tend to want to dominate. Sometimes extreme people have to come in to deal with a destabilized situation. Because, let's face it, if you've got war, if you are on either side of it, one person's likely to be a victim in some respect, and it takes quite a lot of bravery to stand up and go and deal with an oppressor. And I can tell you that from personal experience. So extremism isn't always bad. Sometimes it's just some people have a little bit more balls than other people, and that's pretty much how it is. I'm going to apologize for my French. You see people like Albert Einstein and others who wrote warning us a long time ago of the risks that we could have if we had an ethno-centered state that adopted what might be perceived as racist policies. And this is where we are. So we have to work out how do we get back from there. So linked with this, these are the subjects I was talking about in Mykonos, just before this all blew up. So the whole idea of selfishness versus altruism, what Julie calls a system-level win, which is why we're all here trying to support each other and actually trying to create an environment where everybody can succeed rather than one person succeeding and making money off the back of somebody else and the other person losing. So the idea is selfishness, yeah, it would be altruism within groups. You know, you've got some fascists around, they're going to beat people up. But altruistic groups beat selfish groups, and everything else is commentary. If you get enough of the reasonable people in the centre of that, which is on the heart and that dove, you get enough of them, you know, we can change the world, because we are actually the ones that vote for the people at the top, and we can make enough noise. And this was the Hannah Arendt quote that I had in Mykonos, which was just so prescient, where she talks about, you know, she looked at the issue of Eichmann. I mean, we're in Switzerland now, and Switzerland is considering having the equivalent of an investigation, like the Nuremberg investigations, to try to get an independent assessment of what's actually going on. You know, are they all committing suicide on all parties? Is everyone threatening everybody else's existence? Or are there some root causes? And if there are root causes, how can they be dealt with? And this is really what she was saying, that it's, you know, it's thoughtlessness, it's remoteness from reality that's inherent in us as human beings if we're lazy or we don't think or we get preoccupied with our own affairs. And this is what she calls evil, the banality of evil. It's so commonplace. And, you know, there's multiple researchers that have gone on. And this one's quite interesting because it was a sociological research which, I believe, states the obvious, which is that human prosociality is malleable and different aspects of prosociality can be improved systematically through different types of mental training, which is why healthcare, education is so important. Now, to me, this is stating the obvious because we all know the nature-nurture debate. We're not all born to be racist bigots, you know, economic fraudsters or criminals or bullies or murderers. We're not really, I mean, we may have some genetic predisposition to some of these things. Some people might have. But we all know that nurture is an important part. And we know that education is an important part. And that's something I know that the US has been looking at in Palestinian schools. And I know that the press has also been looking at in Israeli schools. And I saw a video only last week of a child in a school with an educational inspector who actually said that he believed all non-Jews should be slaves. And the educating, this was one of those, you know, these illicit videos that was taken of the school. And in that case, the education inspector said how great the education of the children was in that class. Now, I'm sure if there was a video in a Palestinian school, we might find an equal example. So I'm sitting on the fence here and saying it could be on both sides. But this stuff is leaking into the press, and we can't dismiss it. Now, when I talked about this in Mykonos, and I, again, don't want to get onto religious ideology or politics too far, because the message I want to give is that we all need to come together, and let's resolve to try to make 2024 a year of rebuilding trust. I won't say building, I'll say rebuilding trust, and hope and all that we can accomplish. And we can do that on grassroots level, we can do that at political level. My view is, obviously I'm an ecumenicalist, so for me all the religions are equally important and derive from the same source, which is why I find that last slide about prosociality so stating the obvious. Yes?
Yeah, because there's one thing that you haven't mentioned, and that's migration, which I think is at the moment the biggest threat to peace. If you look at UK, the Netherlands, what's happening, and you have all the votes they share with right-wing parties that have won. And I think the thing that we can do, because some of these political discussions, and there are much more things involved that we can't oversee, so it's much more about politics and money than we can even think of. But I think of initiatives like Bruce. So how do we help poverty in the countries that people do not feel the need to flee for them countries? How can we rebuild those countries? And I think that's very important. That's what we can do. Technology can help and play a great part. More initiatives like Bruce and other things. And I think if we unite some of the technology that we've seen today, there's a great thing that we can do in those countries, because we can't solve the political discussion, because the situation in Israel has been going on for a long, long time and goes very far. But we can maybe with technology and initiatives like Bruce do a great deal for the moment.
Okay, so the issue of migration, I mean, I think it impacts in a number of respects, and I think it's a good point for you to raise. I mean, firstly, that actually is not the issue. Well, it's obviously the reverse of the issue in Israel, which was migration into Israel and displacing the Palestinians.
But there are more situation, of course. Because we will not solve that today. And
we won't solve that today. But in terms of, and obviously this is a very emotionally charged issue. But in terms of the issue, it is all still linked, because the issue of migration that we're grappling with in the West, let's face it, what is the migration that people are worried about? They're worried about Middle Eastern and African migration into predominantly white countries.
No, but we have to realise that that's a problem at the borders. If you're looking at Greece, if you're looking at Italy, that these countries cannot handle, that cannot go on. That doesn't mean that we don't want to help.
No, it's totally linked, because the question is, why are these people all leaving?
No, but on that positive note, so what can we do in these countries?
If I can
unite
answer
technology.
If I can answer that, the first answer is peace, because a lot of these people have been running away from wars, and they've been running away from countries where they have been decimated economically by the strategies of the West. So these issues are all absolutely interlinked, and in terms of having positive discussions about how to resolve them, I mean, the first thing is we want people to stay in their countries so far as they can, because we don't want them to feel they have to leave.
And can I just, I'm sorry, I'm in charge, excuse me, sorry. Can you bring in the drinks? Because I think we need one, okay? Listen, I want to, hold on, everybody, listen. It's my summit, so I get to kind of talk. First of all, I want to, I really, thank you so much. I really, first of all, dear Samantha, listen,
cheers.
You are my friend. Dear Bruce.
Shalom.
Shalom. Everybody, shalom. Peace and harmony, okay?
Yeah, we're going to
I know, just one. I know, we will. But I want just to frame it, because there's some people are coming and some people are going, and I want to make sure we get your last slide. If we can, there was, and we are going to get your last slide, so forgive me for interrupting for just a moment. There was, everybody, can I still have your attention here? We're just going to wrap up the formal talk and so forth. There's one woman who is not able to come, and what she's doing, and I mentioned Paula to you, is she's working with refugees in the Mediterranean, retraining them, right? That's the kind of thing, right? I think you're particularly good at analyzing and framing the issue, and I really value what you do. And we are problem solvers, and we believe in morality, right? We've been talking about morality, solving problems. We're a group of 30 nationalities here. People came in from 15 countries, and so together I know that we can create working groups, and we can be a force for good and the evil. So please finish it up. Let's do it.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this slide really sets it out, because, and just very simplistically, because we do have problems, and those migration problems are firstly obviously caused by war, economics, but also by what we're going to see exponentially in relation to the climate crisis. We know there's going to be massive amounts of displacement around the world, and that was the first speech I did for FTE, on the basis that I genuinely believe there is a lot of nervousness amongst politicians about the future. We are, and this has been predicted by the climate scientists for years, this civil disruption and unrest that we're seeing has been predicted for at least 10 to 20 years, on the basis that it was going to come in any event because of climate change and the effects that would have on our economics. The fact that they don't seem to have solved the problem suggests that people aren't talking about it enough, and we're seeing fragmentation.
We have to solve it. We have to come up with the solutions, because the politicians, they won't. This group of people are not buyers of politicians coming up with solutions. Most entrepreneurs, good or bad, most entrepreneurs are libertarian. They don't believe that governments will solve the problems.
Yep.
However, I think there was some, I particularly appreciated the perspective here. And so if there is one last slide, let's bring it, because I do want to toast, and I do want to leave on a happy note.
So really, this comes back to what we're doing.
Yes, indeed.
Which is really this whole issue of justice for all and fighting economic crime. Because the thought I want to leave you with is, it may appear that a lot of war is ideological, and it may be that there is a substantial component of ideology, but from where I sit as a 30-year, a lawyer who's been practicing for 30 years, a lot of it is actually all about resources. It's all about resources, it's about economic crime, it's about theft of other people's resources and fear of people taking other people's resources. And the tribal instinct does tend to revolve around idealism, ideologies, because that's how people build themselves into communities. But fundamentally, it's about justice and it's about economic resources. And that's where entrepreneurs can come in, because what you are doing is using economic resources to have impact in different places. And so you're able to do things which the politicians should be doing, but regrettably, many of them don't. And, we know why that is.
Thank you very much. No, first of all, because I want to bring formally the FTE to a close. We are going to be going to, we're going down the pike, so to speak, to the Hotel Sun. Some of you are staying at the Hotel Sun. We're having open air fondue, so do wrap yourself up because it's going to be outside tonight. Formally, we're starting at about 7:30. I do just need to do a couple of housekeeping things because we're going to be there tonight, and then tomorrow we're changing the plan. We're going to be back here tomorrow from 12 onwards so that we can do one-on-one interviews. I want to do one-on-ones with the various speakers and so forth. And we're going to still have the camera and the setup here and so forth. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I just want you to know that while I have you all here, we're going to be coming back here tomorrow for those of you that I can interview so that in addition to capturing your keynote, I get the one-on-ones with you because I know some people will be leaving tomorrow and so forth. I want to take the discussion that we're having into bilateral and kind of conversations where we can talk individually, so that we can enjoy another glass, please. Can I? No, I'm asking for another one. No, I wanted to first of all just thank you all. It's been an incredible, and as many people have come here a couple of times, this has been a really incredible group, and I thank you all for coming so far, and thank you for putting those slides together.